the most intriguing divisions this year is the AFC South. Of course, you have some Super Bowl contenders. You have some teams on the rise that could potentially steal the division. There's a lot to talk about here and a lot of different scenarios. But if you're new, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We're going through the AFC South and predicting their records. Pretty simple. Let me know in the comments what you think as well. But that's enough yapping. Let's get into it. Kicking off here strong with the team that shocked the world last season in the Houston Texans. Talk about going from worst to first in their division. They did that plus some. Of course, last year in the draft, they drafted CJ Stroud #2. There was a lot of questions on where they should go with that pick, whether if it's Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, or CJ Stroud. Of course, coincidentally, all three of those quarterbacks ended up staying in the same division, but they get CJ Stroud #2. And then they're not done. They go out there and trade up for the #3 pick with the Arizona Cardinals. They get Will Anderson, two captains on both sides of the ball. Both of those guys helped rally this young group with the new head coaching staff, and they end up going to the playoffs. And not only did they go to the playoffs, they put up 45 points on the Defensive Player of the Year and the best defense in football in the Cleveland Browns in round 1. They go to round 2 and of course, almost take down the Baltimore Ravens if some penalties went their way. So the Texans went from worst to first in a great way last season. They go into this year and they said, hey, we have CJ Stroud on a rookie contract. How can we maximize him in this roster when he's on this smaller contract to win a Super Bowl now? And they kind of did that. They went out there and traded for a disgruntled star and Stephon Diggs to add to this wide receiver room, give them a different element. On the defensive side, you signed a disgruntled star in Minnesota and Danielle Hunter to help in this front seven. So now you have an electric offense with CJ Stroud, all these talented wide receiver options. Of course, Nico Collins you extended, and then Tank Dell's coming back from injury as well. You have an okay offensive line, and then you also brought in Joe Mixon to the mix, no pun intended. So this offense is electric, but can they put it together on the field? On defense, Danielle Hunter, of course, is on the other side of Will Anderson. And Will Anderson's job is never going to be easier having an all-pro level edge like a guy like Danielle Hunter on the other side of him. Of course, this team has the secondary. They have an okay front seven. They have the edge rushers, of course. This team is dangerous, and I'm excited to see what they can do. And, of course, when I was referencing a Super Bowl contender, I meant the Houston Texans. But I have them starting off here against a division rival. Maybe this is their adjustment week. This is where Stephon Diggs gets added into the game plan. You know, the chemistry on the field during the game is different than practice. So this is going to be an adjustment game, a wake-up game, rather, call it that. And they lose on the road week 1 at Indianapolis. I'm a big Indy guy this year. But after that, they get back on track and they say, hey, we are the Houston Texans. You rally off 5 consecutive wins. They get a win against Chicago. Caleb Williams' second career game. I like the Texans' chances in that game, especially primetime football Sunday night. And then you play Minnesota. Minnesota, whether it's Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy, they don't have the quarterback to get it done. So unless Justin Jefferson has a career day, I like the chances for Houston in that one as well. Then you play another divisional game. You lost your first divisional game. You need to start winning those. Of course, those are key down the stretch of the season. You beat Jacksonville at home, and you're staying at home here at Buffalo. You beat Buffalo, and of course, you beat New England as well. So you lose week 1, but then you rally off 5 consecutive wins. And of course, here is a tough stretch here. Week 7, 8, and 9, you have 3 playoff teams. And of course, you can argue 2 of those are Super Bowl contenders. I won't go that far, but definitely 3 playoff caliber teams. Let's see how I have them finishing. I have them losing against the Green Bay Packers. This is a game where I was definitely 50-50. So when we get back to the end of their schedule and when we look at it and we say, okay, this is definitely their floor, which is where I have them. I have them going at their floor right now, going into this season as far as my record prediction. But they lose to Green Bay. They bounce back, get a win against Indy, again, keeping that season split. And then they lose to the Jets Thursday night football after 2 tough games against Green Bay and Indy. Maybe they're a little banged up, short week. They're playing the Jets on the road, and the Jets are also coming off of a bigger break than the Texans going into this matchup. So at the midseason mark, I have them going 6-3. If you're a Texans fan, you're still on top of the division. I'm sure you're pretty happy. But going into the second half of their schedule, they are home against Detroit. This is a huge stretch for me, in my opinion, weeks 10 through 13. Of course, 15 through 18, you can make that same argument. But 10 through 13, after that 6-3 start, that they're kind of where we all expect them to be. But this is a huge stretch because there's a lot of quality opponents. You can argue two Super Bowl contenders in Detroit and Dallas. You need to start picking up some of these bigger wins against bigger opponents, of course, to build some confidence down the stretch for the playoffs. But I think you can beat Detroit. I think you can beat Dallas. I think you can beat Tennessee. Now, at this point, I would say it's a divisional game. Weird things happen. Even though I have Houston beating all of the top dogs, we saw last year. Detroit loses to teams like Chicago last year with Tyson Bagent, or almost did, right? This stuff can happen. So I have them losing to Jacksonville in Duval, bringing their Week 14 bye week to 9-4. Again, heading into that game against Jacksonville, they're also probably super tired, going through a stretch of Green Bay, Indianapolis, New York, the Jets. I think the Jets are going to be good. Then you have Detroit and Dallas in a 5-week stretch. You're going to be tired heading into that Tennessee and that Jacksonville game. So again, some of those losses can rack up in the division. But 9-4 record, and now here is a stretch run. You're playing 4 playoff level teams. 3 of them arguably, depending on how big of a Miami Dolphin believer you are, can be Super Bowl contenders. But I have them beating Miami. I have them beating Kansas City, getting some revenge from last year, and then beating Baltimore, getting some revenge from the second round of the playoffs last year. And that brings the record to, what would that be, 12-4 at that point in the season. Now, at that point in the season, they would have the division locked up. Going into the last week of the season, they would have the division locked up so they can rest their guys week 18. And I have Tennessee, because of that, picking up a win to end the year. So let me clarify by saying the 12-5 is what I have them at, but that's their absolute floor. They can beat Tennessee both times. They can beat Green Bay. They can beat the Jets. And that would bring their record to 14-3. But again, I also have them getting big victories against Detroit, Dallas, Kansas City, Baltimore. So a lot of these wins can definitely go either way. I have them at their floor, I believe, here at 12-5. Regardless, you still win the AFC South. Kicking over here to Indianapolis, you had an offseason where you just needed to get your quarterback back, right? The dynamic ability of Anthony Richardson was on display for the first month or so of last year, and he was good. He was dynamic, and of course, he got a couple big wins there early in the year just based off his ability, not so much with his arm. But Anthony Richardson is now back in the mix. He says he's about 90% ready. He should be ready for day number 1 of the NFL season. Of course, what do we have? 8 to 10 weeks left before the season actually starts, if not longer. So Anthony Richardson will be back. You added some talent there in the draft, getting a guy like Adonai Mitchell on the offensive side. So now you have a core 4 wide receiver group of Michael Pittman, who you extended career year last year. You have Josh Downs, came out of nowhere out of North Carolina last year. Huge season. He's going to be their number 2. And then you bring in Adonai Mitchell. We've heard nothing but praise around him this offseason. And then you talk about Alec Pierce, a guy that goes under the radar, a coach's favorite, first in, last out kind of guy there in Alec Pierce. So you have 4 really good wide receivers, an okay tight end room, a great offensive line, and I haven't even mentioned their best offensive piece in Jonathan Taylor yet. This offense is going to be electric, especially with Shane Steichen running this offense, of course, RPO-heavy style of scheme, that he loves to use, especially when he did there in Philly for so many years. He's bringing that back to this offense, and I think that this team has a chance to make the playoffs. We haven't even talked about their defense. Their defense is okay, but what I want to highlight here is that they re-signed DeForest Buckner, and that they went out there and they drafted, to me, the best defensive player in the class in Laiatu Latu, and they didn't need to trade up to get him. It falls into their lap because there was, 14 straight offensive players in the draft this year. Laiatu falls to the Colts, and I think this is a guy that can have double-digit sacks in year number 1, given the fact that DeForest Buckner is on the same defensive line, given the fact he's a rookie. Laiatu Latu comes into this team and this year as the most polished pass rusher in the class. And I think, again, he can have double-digit sack numbers, and he could be the defensive rookie of the year. So keep that in mind because I have high hopes for Laiatu Latu. You start off the year strong. You get a lot of quality wins, and this is where we say, hey, the Colts are legit. They're here for a reason. You get big wins against 4, potential playoff teams in the Houston Texans, the Green Bay Packers, the Chicago Bears, and the Pittsburgh Steelers. You start off the year strong. You can't get much better. And really because of this is I have them starting off so strong because other teams don't have a large sample size of what this team likes to do with Anthony Richardson. when a quarterback plays an entire year, like CJ Stroud did last year, other NFL teams have a full sample size of what coverages what defenses bother them, right? What adjustments bother them. They don't have a big sample size on Anthony Richardson. I think they can capitalize on that to start the year, and they can get off to a 4-0 start. But then things get rough. Then things get rough because you still run into a lot of quality opponents, and a lot of them being divisional opponents, and they're going to beat you up. So Jacksonville in Duval, you lose that one. But then you go to Tennessee. In Tennessee, you lose that one. Again, Jacksonville, Tennessee, two quality opponents, borderline playoff teams this year. But then you have Miami at home. You get back on track here. You beat Miami because, of course, Miami struggles to beat halfway decent teams. And then you get back on the losing side because you lose in Houston to Houston. They want their revenge. And then you go to Minnesota. This one's definitely a toss-up. I can have the Colts getting an extra win here when we look back at the end of the season. But the NFL is weird. Maybe this is J.J. McCarthy's first game of the season. Maybe he comes out on fire like Will Levis did last year and, gets his team over the top. But this could also just be a Justin Jefferson game, right? At the end of the day. The Minnesota Vikings in Minnesota will pick up a win there against the Indianapolis Colts. Again, throughout the Minnesota Vikings history as a franchise, they win regular season games. Let's get into the second half of the season because at the end of the first half, what are you? You're 5-4. You're 5-4. You're still above 500. I believe at this point you're in the middle of the pack with Tennessee and of course Houston at the time, and of course Jacksonville as well. You get a big win against Buffalo here. And again, this is another game where I have you losing to Minnesota, but I have you beating Buffalo. So these are games that can go up in the air, but I have you winning the important AFC games down the stretch of the season. You beat Buffalo, you lose to New York, the Jets, on Sunday Night Football in New York. Of course, if the Jets are still healthy at this point, then I still think that they're going to be a Super Bowl contending team. You lose that one, you lose to Detroit, but then you beat New England to bring your record to 7-6 before your Week 14 bye week. Again, Houston and Indy, 2 Week 14 bye weeks. I think that's the absolute worst bye week you can have. Well, outside of the Week 5 bye week, right? Because that's so early in the season. But Week 14 is such a bad bye week to have unless you just plan on blowing everybody out. But let's get into the last month of the season. 4 very winnable games. You guys see them. Let's get into it. I think they beat Denver in Mile High. Now, this one, again, Denver is maybe one of the hardest places to play next to Kansas City and Seattle because of their home field advantages. But I think at this point, it'll probably be Bo Nix at the quarterback position. If not, maybe Jarrett Stidham is still there. I'm going to have the Indianapolis Colts winning that one. They're going to split with Tennessee, but then they close off the year here, beating the Giants in New York, even though they have a great defense. And then you're going to close off the year splitting with Jacksonville as well. This might be their floor. This might be their ceiling. You guys tell me. I think it's kind of in the middle. I can see them going 9-8. I can see them going 11-5. So I have them kind of in the middle here at 10-7. Again, they lose some questionable games, but they win some big time games, especially in the AFC against Buffalo. If you don't win that game, you don't make the playoffs. So 10-7 for the Colts. I think you sneak into the playoffs if you're a Colts fan. Let's get into Jacksonville. Jacksonville going into last year. Let's just say that I was super high on them, and I didn't miss much. Last season when I made these prediction videos, I had 10 of the 14 playoff teams right, and 7 of the 8 division winners outside of Houston. I didn't get that one right because I had Jacksonville winning the division. So if Jacksonville won the division, I would have predicted all of the division winners last year correctly. Let's just say that that was my biggest miss on the year last year. But this year, I'm not going to make that same mistake. This team is solid, right? This team lost Calvin Ridley, but you're not too worried about that. That didn't really work out in that stint. You bring in Gabe Davis, you give him a bag, you draft Brian Thomas Jr., and then you get Christian Kirk back and healthy. So this offense is the same offense, but you add Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis. So a lot of talented receiving options around a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who I still believe in. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is a bad quarterback by any means. Defensively, there's some questions, but you still have talented guys like Travon Walker, who still needs to take that extra step, saying that he was a former #1 overall pick. You still have Tyson Campbell on the outside, of course. You have a lot of talented pieces on both sides of the ball, but can you put it together against quality opponents to get a lot of big wins? And this year, Jacksonville, let's just say, has a very tough schedule. They start off the year at Miami. I think, again, Tyson Campbell's great. He can't guard Tyreek Hill because no one can. And this could just be another magical Week 1 performance from Mr. Tyreek Hill. they lose that one. They have Cleveland at home. This is a very winnable game. As a Browns fan, very winnable game, right? Because the Browns play down to their competition. But I think they're going to lose that one. I'll give my Browns a little bit of an edge. Then you lose to Buffalo. You lose to Houston again in their hometowns. So your first 4 weeks are against playoff caliber teams, no doubt about it. So really your first 9 weeks, you have 8 of those against playoff teams, excluding New England. It's a tough schedule for Jacksonville. Just like Pittsburgh, Jacksonville definitely got a less favorable schedule this year. Let's just say that. But then, you start to get the wheels turning. You start to get the, things going in the right direction. You beat Indianapolis for your first one on the season. You lose to Chicago. You're going to London. I should have probably had Jacksonville winning this game, but who knows? Caleb Williams in London, anything can happen, right? But then you have another game in London. 2 games back-to-back in London, if I'm not mistaken. This Week 7 game might be in Germany. Regardless, they're in overseas, right? You beat New England overseas, wherever that game may be, right? Maybe if it's on Mars. But then you talk about Green Bay here in Philadelphia. You lose to Green Bay, but then you get a huge win here. Of course, revenge game there a little bit for Doug Peterson, even though that's way behind us at this point. You get a big win there Week 9, Sunday Night Football. Philadelphia has a tough stretch before this game, so they're going to come in a little banged up. Jacksonville, they need a win desperately, and you get a big win there Sunday night against the Philadelphia Eagles. You beat Minnesota, carrying that momentum over, but then you lose to Detroit there in Detroit, bringing your bye week record to 4-7. And at this point, there's a lot of questions. Is Doug Peterson the guy? Is Trevor Lawrence the guy? What do we do from here? Because we had a team last year where we thought, hey, we can make a serious run. You crumbled last year. This year, it's not looking so great. So how are we going to bounce back here to close off the season? Can we make a playoff push at 4-7? Well, I think you start off on the right foot. You get a huge win against Houston, but you lose to Tennessee. And then you lose to the Jets. But you beat Las Vegas, Tennessee, but then you lose to Indy Week 18. Indy needs to get into the playoffs. They have more to play for at that point. And Jacksonville would just be trying to play spoiler. So again, I still believe in Trevor Lawrence. I still believe in a lot of these pieces. Guys like Christian Kirk, guys like Brian Thomas Jr., I think will be solid in the NFL. ETN, of course. Evan Ingram, of course. For fantasy football, this team is going to be amazing. But as far as real life, they just have a very tough schedule, as you can see, but I still have them going 7-10. I think that's I don't want to say that. I will say that's their floor. 6-11, well, 7-10 is their absolute floor, which is kind of the trend of what I did for this division on accident, right? But 7-10 is their floor. They could definitely pick up a lot of quality wins here. Maybe they beat New York, right? If they're not healthy, maybe they beat Tennessee twice. Maybe they beat Cleveland there. And those wins tally up, and who knows, then you have a 10-win football team. But 7-10, I have Jacksonville going, and this is going to light a fire under them to say, we need to make some serious changes, whether if that's getting rid of Doug Peterson, whether if that's, switching up these pieces on either side of the ball. But Trevor Lawrence is their guy, and I think it's going to be a great year. They're just going to have a lot of probably one-possession games not go their way, and they'll end off the year below 500. The last team here is a team that is definitely interesting, right? Because we made a video on this and it got a lot of buzz around it in the Tennessee Titans. You fully commit to Will Levis, who is in the media right now for the wrong reasons, and I'll leave it at that. But you commit to Will Levis, and this is the guy that's going to be your quarterback, at least for the next year and a half. You go out there and draft J.C. Latham because Joe Alt went off the board there to Los Angeles. So you get, in your mind, the second best tackle off the board in J.C. Latham. He helps you up front tremendously. You did lose Derrick Henry this offseason, but you're committing to Tajay Spears going out of Tulane, of course. And then so you have a solid running back room, right? Centered around Tajay Spears, and then you bring in Tony Pollard as well. So you have a dynamic thunder and lightning kind of a punch there in the backfield. You have a decent offensive line. You have your quarterback, and then you bring in Calvin Ridley. Definitely an overpay. I'm not gonna think twice about that. You definitely overpaid, but you now have a dynamic receiving room as well. You have Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and of course you still have Chigozie Okonkwo in the tight end room as well. I like to tell people that he reminds me of a David Njoku, kind of a tight end where he's just uber athletic. You just need to give him the ball and let him go to work in space. But you had a very busy offseason offensively. Defensively, this is where it gets interesting. Because you trade for L'Jarius Sneed, you sign Chidobe Awuzie, you have upgraded this defensive secondary immensely, right? And then you also made some solid moves there in the draft as well. This is a team that has the potential, if you're the Tennessee Titans, to make a playoff push. But can they get it done? Let's see if they can get it done. Week 1 against Chicago, Caleb Williams' first game. Even though he's home in this matchup, Tennessee has a very talented defense. And of course, I think they're just a little bit more settled in here in week number 1. You're going to get a big win if you're the Tennessee Titans. But then you lose to the Jets, you lose to Green Bay, but then you pick up a big win against Miami in Miami. So at this point, you're like, what's going on? We're winning the road games, we're losing the home games. Tennessee is typically a place where we win a lot of games. And trust me, that's going to change here throughout the rest of the schedule. But 2-2 record at week 5. And this is one of those bye weeks I hate because I just think that it's unnecessary. You need a bye week from week 7 through 11. You need a bye week from that middle of the season stretch to reset your body, not this early in the season, because now, even though you're going to pick up some wins here if you're Tennessee, you're going to run into some problems where you're going to be running into a lot of quality opponents and you're going to be banged up for the latter half of the season. But you're going to get a big win here coming out of the bye week. You get a quick little reset. You beat Indy. You beat Buffalo in Buffalo. Big loss there for Buffalo. But then you lose to Detroit and you beat New England. Going into the second half of the season, you're actually tied with the Houston Texans for the division lead here with a, what would that be, a 5-3 record. So you're tied with Houston at the midseason mark. I think you're pretty happy if you're Tennessee. But then here's where some things go downhill. Again, you're banged up. You're playing a team like the Chargers that are going to be a physical ground and pound team in LA. I know LA doesn't have much of a home field advantage, but you're playing a team that likes to be dominant and physical up front. And that's going to run into some problems for a Tennessee front seven that doesn't have a defensive front seven. That it's not their strong suit outside of Jeffrey Simmons. Let's just say that. But you lose that one in LA. You're playing a Minnesota team that will have a similar strategy. I know they have a lot of talented receiving options, but they're going to be a run-focused offense, and they have a great offensive line there in Minnesota. You're going to run into the same problems there. And then Houston, well, they can do everything. You lose that one as well. So after such a promising start to the season, you're already under 500, 5-6 record. How can we close out the season? Well, I think you could beat Washington in Washington. At this point in the season, there's no doubt in my mind this is going to be Jaden Daniels at the quarterback position. You can take advantage of the young quarterback and, of course, get a big win. So you're 6-6. There's 5 weeks left. How can we finish out the year? You beat Jacksonville 7-6. You lose to Cincinnati 7-7. But then you beat Indy in Indy. Huge win. You're 8-7. But then you have Jacksonville in Duval. You lose that one. And then Houston, of course, they're resting their starters late in the season. You get a big win, 9-8. To close out the year if you're the Tennessee Titans. You pass your Vegas money line as far as wins. But you're Tennessee, I think if you go into the offseason with a 9-8 records, you're one game out of the playoffs. Because if you beat Indy both times, you actually make the playoffs if you're the Tennessee Titans because you beat Buffalo. So if you're Tennessee, you're actually the first team out of my AFC playoff picture, as crazy as that might sound, right there next to Pittsburgh, right? But if you're Tennessee 9-8 record, this is just, I think you can go into the offseason and say, okay, we have something here. We just need time to grow and develop and mesh on the field, especially for Will Levis. At this point in time, I don't think you have to go out there and commit to a new quarterback. You have your quarterback. Let's just continue to add pieces around him with this new offensive scheme and, of course, new offensive coaching staff that we have centered around Bill Callahan. And let's just let it grow and develop. But 9-8 record, of course, you're one of the first teams out of the AFC playoffs in my eyes. But, of course, I understand there's a lot more hype around them. They could definitely make a lot more noise. But for the AFC South predictions, Houston at 12-5, they win the division. Of course, they have this is their floor. I think they can go as high as maybe a 14-3, 13-4 kind of a record. But, again, you saw what I had them going earlier on. They win the division. Indianapolis. They go 10-7. I think that's kind of, their middle ground. I could definitely see them finishing better. Definitely could see them finishing worse. But they go 10-7 and they sneak into the playoffs, getting a huge win against Tennessee late in the year. And, of course, they would get the 7th spot in the AFC. Tennessee, 9-8 record. We just talked about it. They're one of my first teams out. Jacksonville, they have a tough schedule. And because of that, they still finish 7-10, maybe 8-9. But I can't see this team finishing with double-digit wins unless a lot of the cards fall right. Maybe some injuries happen, which they will because it's the NFL. Maybe Jacksonville gets a lot more of those wins in the second half of the year than I had them originally getting. But of course, we don't predict injuries around here. At the Anomaly Podcast, we hope that in a magical world, everybody can stay healthy for a full stretch of the season, and we get the best absolute football on a week-to-week basis. But of course, that's in a magical world. But that's going to do it. Episode 180. We just surpassed 18,000 subscribers for episode 180. So kind of cool there. But we're on the road to 20,000 subscribers. And of course, 25,000 subscribers. And we can't get there without you. So if you enjoyed, if you made it to this point, you at least found this video tolerable. So drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, drop a comment as well. How do you think this division will play out? What do you think the records could be? Who do you think is going to make the playoffs, right? Let me all know all of that here in the comments, because every single week now, again, for the next 5 or so weeks, we're going to be going through each and every team, giving you our record predictions. But until next week, of course, stay happy, stay healthy, and enjoy the NBA Finals. Of course, game 1 is tonight.